We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. I can and can't say. I don't do access journalism. I don't do both sides, when one side is lighting the Constitution on fire and calling it law and order. I show up when the system starts eating itself, when the mask slips, when the paperwork doesn't match the propaganda, when the people inside the machine start whispering the part they were never supposed to say out loud. And right now, the machine is openly malfunctioning in Minnesota because Trump's ICE has effectively turned on its own Department of Justice in a shocking move, not in a dramatic Hollywood way, in a colder, more dangerous way, by ignoring federal court orders, stonewalling DOJ lawyers, and daring the judiciary to do something about it. Here's what's happening. There's a new war front in Minnesota federal courthouses. It's ICE versus the DOJ. They're not getting along. They're not communicating. ICE isn't returning phone calls, and it's spilling into the open in real time, right in front of judges who are watching their orders get treated like optional suggestions. Multiple reports describe a surge of habeas petitions and repeated failures by ICE to follow orders to release detainees or bring them to court, prompting extraordinary judicial responses. The face of this mess, at least, the one the public heard, was a DOJ attorney named Julie Lee. You may have already seen the clip or heard the quote because it's the kind of courtroom moment you can't script. She said out loud in a hearing to Judge Blackwell that the job sucks, the system sucks, and she can't get ICE, her own client, to comply with court orders. She tells the judge it's like pulling teeth. And yes, that's being reported widely as a real courtroom breakdown, not a parody. In the original account, Judge Blackwell presses her. Why aren't my orders on writs of habeas corpus being followed? Why aren't people being released from custody or brought into the courtroom when the court orders it? And Lee's answer isn't the usual sterile government lawyer language. She basically confesses she can't force ICE to do what the court demanded. She says she's trying, but she can't do it. She says it's like pulling teeth. But there are two more facts that came out about that hearing. Two data points that make this uglier. First, Lee tells the judge she's carrying an absurd caseload. In the original story, she says she has 80 habeas corpus petition cases that were handed to her after she volunteered stupidly to do this job. Reports around the episode describe a huge volume of cases dumped on her in a short time, with little support, as the system strains under an enforcement surge. Second, and this is where it gets personal, she acknowledges she's Vietnamese American and says essentially, as you can see, I'm not white. She points to racial profiling being at the heart of many of these cases, and she's troubled because her own family is at risk. That's not a slogan. That's a government lawyer in open court, signaling that the enforcement machinery she represents is frightening enough, that she's worried it could swallow her own people too. And the Department of Justice is described as so strapped for personnel that they didn't fire her even though the judge was close to finding her in contempt. She allegedly begged to be sent to jail for contempt just to get some sleep, saying the kind of things you almost never hear from the DOJ table. And the original narrator says they just reassigned her back to ICE. Some public reporting aligns with the idea that her outburst triggered internal retaliation. DHS officials publicly condemned her conduct, and at least one major report says DHS fired her after the courtroom rebellion. So whether the internal personnel move was reassigned first and then fired, or vice versa, the key point remains the administration's answer wasn't fix compliance. It was punish the messenger. And she's not alone. Other DOJ lawyers in Minnesota, according to the original account, have told judges they're overwhelmed, that there isn't an ability to do justice, and that they can't get responsiveness from their own clients. ICE, DHS, Border Patrol, who just won't listen. Judges are throwing up their hands. The whole thing reads like a legal system being flooded on purpose, then blamed for failing to swim. Now let's zoom out. This isn't just one lawyer losing it. It's a symptom of a bigger rot. Chief Judge Patrick Schiltz of the U.S. District Court for Minnesota, described in the original account as a right-wing conservative appointed by George W. Bush and a former clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, issued a blistering order about ICE defying court authority. Multiple outlets report that Schiltz cataloged dozens of violations and took the extraordinary step of summoning ICE's acting director, Todd Lyons, to appear personally and explain why he should not be held in contempt. Read that again. A chief federal judge ordering the head of ICE to show up in court or face contempt because ICE keeps violating court orders. That's not normal. That's not activist judges. That's the judiciary trying to keep its spine from being snapped in public. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. This is happening in January 2026 in Minnesota, amid what reporting describes as an aggressive immigration campaign that overwhelmed the legal system, with hundreds of habeas petitions in weeks. In January alone, there were almost 100 court orders ignored and defied by ICE. In Minnesota, more than most agencies have defied in their entire existence. Public reporting confirms that Schiltz documented widespread violations and that the scale was extraordinary, enough to justify extraordinary measures. So what do we have? We have ICE versus DOJ in open court. We have federal judges caught in the middle. We have DOJ lawyers saying they can't ethically do their jobs because their client ICE won't follow orders. And we have the Trump administration's communications machine trying to pre-bake the excuse, calling judges activists, while the record shows these orders are being issued by judges across the spectrum, including the conservative chief judge himself. And then you get to the operational reality. When leadership evaporates, when the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota loses almost all of its leadership again in the original telling, and some Trumper gets appointed to calm the waters, but there aren't enough employees. So they grab people from ICE lawyers who may be inexperienced in federal habeas litigation, professionally immature, overwhelmed, and throw them into constitutional quicksand. ICE doesn't care. The courts care. The detainees' families care. And Trump cares about one thing, the image of power. Julie Lee in court reportedly said it took dozens of phone calls and even threats that she would quit to get ICE to comply with federal court orders that usually mean someone must be released from detention or brought in immediately for a bond hearing. And if those orders are ignored, what's left of the rule of law? Just vibes, just uniforms, just fear. Judge Schiltz, according to both the original telling and mainstream reporting, is moving toward contempt proceedings against Todd Lyons because of ICE's wholesale abuse of the federal judiciary. That matters because contempt is one of the only blunt tools courts have when an executive agency decides it's above the law. Now let me speak, anonymous to you, citizen to citizen, and yes, lawyer to lawyer, the way the original narrator did. If you're a government lawyer and you're in a situation where you can't do your job ethically, where your client is pushing you to ignore court orders, or to drag your feet, or to play games with custody transfers, you are not just doing your job. You are an officer of the court. You are sworn to uphold the Constitution. You are bound by professional responsibility rules. You can lose your law license for being the instrument of a client whose independent judgment has been compromised. And while this courtroom war is erupting, the enforcement push is also creeping into spaces it has no business terrorizing, like schools. The original account mentions a new federal lawsuit involving Democracy Forward and Sky Perryman's group aimed at stopping ICE enforcement in and around public schools to stop scaring children and parents. And that's not just talk. On February 4th, 2026, a lawsuit in Minnesota sought to keep immigration enforcement away from schools, with plaintiffs describing fear, disrupted attendance, and enforcement activity near school properties. Because here's the moral line: if you genuinely needed, legitimately, in good faith to pick up someone who violated immigration laws or committed crimes, you have options. You don't need to stalk school zones, bus stops, or spaces where children are supposed to be safe. Yet the allegations in that school-related lawsuit describe enforcement actions near schools and communities reporting sharp drops in attendance because families are terrified. This is what Trump does. He doesn't just enforce laws, he weaponizes fear. He doesn't just stretch institutions, he breaks them, and then points at the wreckage and says, "See, government doesn't work." He turns agencies into brands, uniforms into props, human beings into numbers, and judges into enemies. And when his own DOJ lawyers can't even get ICE to pick up the phone, the truth is obvious. This isn't governance. It's chaos as a strategy. So what's the power of a federal court to fix this? The original narrator answers bluntly. Start holding people in contempt. Start issuing orders to show cause. Drag leadership from DOJ, Border Patrol, DHS, into court. Call them out. Threaten jail if they keep defying the judiciary. And yes, Chief Judge Schiltz has already taken steps in that direction by ordering ICE's acting director to personally appear and show cause why contempt shouldn't follow. That's all the original detail. And I'm repeating it for one reason, because what's happening in Minnesota isn't just a story. It's a warning. It's a bright red flare that says the Trump administration's immigration apparatus is so reckless, it's now colliding with its own lawyers, its own judges, its own constitutional boundaries, and it's still accelerating. If you're watching this and thinking, that can't happen here, it already is. It's happening in January and February 2026, in real courtrooms, in real dockets, with a conservative chief judge ordering ICE leadership to explain themselves. Don't look away. Don't normalize it. Share this. Talk about it. We are anonymous. We are watching, and we do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.